Caswell's property, where the arrow is around this bend. His debris was found throughout the entire area. I can't do this. It's not working. Can someone from tech show me why this isn't working?
Media, can we get a little help?
Okay, I got
Okay.
it. Our churches,
Media, she's got it.
our churches in our neighborhood also faced the destruction. Our community was torn apart. And our homes were devastated. On October 31st, our worst fears were realized. These are homes on Bluff Springs Road that never flooded before. They were built in the 70s. The arrow is pointing to where Jim Caswell's property was. And we believe that the property, the commercial property at 8901 Bluff Springs Road, known as Caswell Services, contributed to the severity of the flooding on Bluff Springs Road and all of the adjacent neighborhoods. Simply put, the normal flow of the creek was blocked. Onion Creek winds around Caswell's property. This is Slaughter Lane, this is Brant Road. The creek, this is the Onion Creek Bridge, this is Bluff Springs Road. The creek winds around his property. This doesn't occur anywhere else. Normally, before Caswell Services, the water would come up and flood the banks here first before anywhere else. We used to even stand on the bridge and watch it flow through this property. But when Jim Caswell moved in and made this an industrial storage yard, he built a wall of junk, this purple line, made of railroad containers, an open pavilion filled from the ground to the ceiling, which diverted the water. And this was the aftermath. This is the property that the water used to flow through. And this is the property that the water did flow through on October 31st. And this is the debris field. This debris field stretched all the way down Onion Creek, through all of our properties, through the green belt, and left this level of destruction and debris. This is why this is a priority for us. Upstream from Caswell's property, this is Onion Creek Bridge again, this is Bluff Springs Road, here's Caswell. Upstream, you can see there is no industrial debris. This is only natural trees, logs. But on the other side of Bluff Springs Road is where the debris field started. This is the open pavilion that was suggested by TNR to put a chain link fence around it. That, I don't fault them because they didn't have the laws to enforce anymore, but this was the best that they could do given the tools they had. And this is where the debris field began. Weeks of filling dumpsters paid for by the county didn't put a dent in his debris. This is the open pavilion to the right. It was completely filled. We had witnessed it from the neighbor's property. It was filled from the ground to the ceiling with everything from building supplies, washers, dryers, tons of junk, building supplies, and even a barn filled with carpets contaminated the creek, the park, and our neighborhood. This remained like this until last week when TCEQ paid them a visit, and all of a sudden the cleanup has started again. And this is the history for those of you who weren't here when we started. For 8 years, the Bluff Springs Neighborhood Association begged the county, TNR, and the county attorney to intervene, knowing that a storage yard in the floodway and literally on the banks of Onion Creek, which is supposed to be a protected watershed, would cause severe flooding and damage to our neighborhood. And no one listened. We feared that this amount of storage and debris would dam up the creek, divert the floodwaters, and flood out our entire valley, and it did. And we believe that Caswell Services contributed to the severity of this flood in our particular neighborhood and to the loss of 30 horses found buried in debris. His railroad containers, and there were numerous ones, acted like steel dams, and the open pavilion overflowing with building supplies, appliances, and heavy machinery added even more blockage. And after the flood, it was empty. Dozens of cars were scattered or carried away, and debris from his now empty pavilion was strewn everywhere downstream in his neighbors' pastures, yards, the creek, and the park. This is, ironically, Google Earth took this photo. It was dated October 31st, 2013. Sort of divine intervention to show you exactly what happened after the flood. His salvaged cars, and a witness thought there were about between 50 and 60 of them in that property, were scattered about like Tonka toys. The cleanup, again, I want to emphasize, was at the county's expense and at our expense. Neighbors witnessed him, actually, once he filled the county dumpsters, neighbors witnessed him bringing even more debris and just throwing it on the street. And then TNR's resources came and picked up the stuff from the street and had to take it away. In addition, he didn't offer any assistance or spend one dime to help clean up his debris from our yards. Neighbors had to purchase additional rental of additional dumpsters at their own expense, which was an additional financial burden to have it removed. When we asked for help, TNR suggested that we ask Caswell to be a good neighbor and clean it up, saying that the situation was similar to a neighbor's tree falling in your yard. Well, as you can see from the photos, that's hardly the case. And Jim Caswell has never been a good neighbor. 4 months later, he hadn't cleaned up his own mess until TCEQ, the district attorney, and other environmental agencies have stepped in. And even after numerous warnings from the day he moved in, from neighbors, from the association, knowing the threat he posed to our neighborhood, he continued to bring in more and more materials, which we believe put our homes and lives at danger. Our neighborhood has paid the price. Here's an example of one of the railroad containers that blocked the water from flowing naturally. He had numerous of these containers that were parallel to Bluff Springs Road. So when the water tried to go through his property, it hit the railroad containers. It hit the barn filled with carpet. It hit the pavilion. It hit the 60 cars. And it diverted, or contributed diverting the floodwaters down Bluff Springs Road. Industrial appliances and heavy equipment that once filled his pavilion and across his land was strewn everywhere downstream. Our horses didn't have a chance being hit by this kind of heavy debris. The few horses that did survive, I believe there were 5, or maybe a few more, managed to get carried away by the floodwaters and dodge the debris and be carried to the other side of the creek. Tons of junk contaminated Onion Creek, littered the park, and ruined our properties. This is what was in our backyards. This is what most people haven't seen. I spoke to one of the searchers looking for horses, and she asked, "Is there a laundromat nearby?" There were so many washers and dryers in the park, searchers actually asked if there was a laundromat, and that's no exaggeration. And weeks later, months later, tons of debris still remained on his property and on his neighbor's property. And what was a beautiful green belt became a graveyard for Caswell's junk and our horses. Black plastic bags, carpets, roofing and building supplies filled our yards, the creek, and the park. An entire barn filled with carpets was swept away. Carpets ended up in trees some 40 feet high. This was found in our neighborhood president, the new neighborhood president association's backyard, Linda Donovan's. How do you remove stuff like this? Carpets were found in our backyards. These were the rolled up carpets, a barn filled, that came raging down the creek, hitting horses that were trying to swim. They were found around trees and buried horses. And one was actually found on top of Josefina Rodriguez's empty SUV in his neighbor's pasture. Roofing supplies and 5-gallon containers of tar littered our yards, the creek, and park. Commissioner Gomez walked our neighborhood after the flood and actually saw the fencing, his signs, and this roofing material with 5-gallon containers of tar in his neighbor's yard. His signs were also found with other materials throughout the park, creek, and our pastures. This one was found in the Greenbelt. Our creek is polluted and our park is unrecognizable. How could a diesel container like this be allowed in the floodway? Not even the floodplain, this is the floodway. It'll take years for our Greenbelt to recover. And thousands of black plastic bags scattered high in our trees and throughout the park are a constant reminder of our worst fears and our unanswered pleas. This was our beautiful Greenbelt. Other commercial properties like USA Autos on Brant Road also need to be considered for buyouts. They may not be in a crucial spot as Caswell services, but these drums of motor oil were found everywhere. Hazmat came out the day after the flood and determined that there were spills throughout the neighborhood. And even as far down Bluff Springs Road in front of the First Baptist Church. We cannot let this happen again. This crucial piece of creekfront property needs to be bought out and made open space. It is one of the most important parcels for flood mitigation in this neighborhood. Our neighborhood is asking that you hear our pleas this time. We've been asking for 8 years to please make this property an exception and a priority in your buyouts. Onion Creek is one of Austin's treasures. It will take years to recover. You have the power to make sure this never happens again and to protect the Onion Creek watershed. And even by waiting on this specific property, you're putting those of us that are not part of the first buyout at continual risk.
Oh, you're about to conclude, Ms. Zwilling?
Right now, this is the last one.
Okay.
This is Onion Creek before the flood. I'm asking that the commissioners please make this an exception and to please not let this happen again. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Any questions?